Hey, welcome back to 65 Drums. My name's Justin. So there are so many electronic drum sets on the market today that it makes shopping for them very confusing unless you spend hours and hours of research. So that's what this new series of videos is all about. We'll talk about which ones are worth buying and which ones that I personally would stay away from. Okay, so let's get started with drum set number one, the Yamaha DTX402K, coming in at $500. So the unfortunate truth that I've noticed about Japanese electronic drum companies is that their intermediates and their flagship stuff are awesome, but their beginner, cheapest level stuff is not worth buying most of the time, in my opinion. And that also goes for the Yamaha DTX402K. The reason why this particular model is not on my buy list is because it doesn't have any premium toms or snare, and also it doesn't have a kick drum tower. For some people, maybe that's good because having a beaterless kick drum pedal makes less noise if you're on the second or third floor of an apartment and you don't want to annoy your neighbors. But for most people, instead what I would buy is the Yamaha DTX452K. Now that drum set is no longer in production, but buying used electronic drums, especially if you're in this price range of around $500 to $700, usually gives you better value for your money. Moving ahead to the next drum set, we have the Yamaha DTX432K coming in at $600. So this is the cheapest electronic drum set from Yamaha that I would personally buy, simply because it has an actual kick drum tower, which I always say is extremely important. There's only one other upgrade: you get a nicer hi-hat controller. It won't change your life, but it is slightly nicer. And the last drum set in the 402 series is the Yamaha DTX452K coming in at $700. This drum set is nearly identical once again, and the only upgrade you get is a better snare drum. It's still rubber, but it now has 3 zones: drum head, rim shot, and rim click zones. To be honest, I really don't think this drum set is worth buying because of its $700 price tag. Once you get in this price range, you can't really offer a drum set with only rubber pads anymore. The entire industry moved past that phase quite a while ago. So instead, what I would do is either buy a used Yamaha drum set or shift up or down. So if you're around this price, you might as well go up to the Yamaha DTX6 series or step down to the DTX432K. I should probably also mention that all these Yamaha drum sets have an app called Record and Share. This allows you to record drum covers directly to your cell phone without worrying about buying a bunch of other components to make it happen. Now let's move ahead to the next drum set, the Yamaha DTX6K-X, coming in at $1,000. Okay, so what does that extra $300 in price bump give you? The first is a better snare drum pad. It's not any larger, but it feels way nicer because they're using their TCS material. The tom pads, however, have gotten an inch smaller, which is a downside. The drum module is probably the biggest upgrade because they're using the DTX Pro module. The previous one only has 10 kits, something like that. This new one has much more sounds. It has the ability to handle way more pads, and it just has higher quality sounds overall. You can import lots of samples. This is, in my opinion, the best module at this specific price point. The drum rack is also different, it's upgraded. And finally, there's a better ride cymbal. It has 3 zones, and when used with this module, it has positional sensing. The tone of hitting the bow area changes depending on how close you play to the bell. This module also supports this feature on the snare input, but according to this chart on Yamaha.com, only for a certain snare that's sold separately and doesn't come with this kit. The downside, however, is the fact that it's still using rubber tom pads, which might annoy some people. If you want to get around that, you'll have to spend more money, but at this price, the drum set is not bad at all. I actually do like this drum set. Now let's move ahead to the next drum set, the Yamaha DTX6K2-X, coming in at $1,500. So what does that extra $500 in price bump give you? The first is that you get 2 crash cymbals instead of 1. The next is that all the cymbals basically have been upgraded. The ride cymbal stays the same, but now the crashes aren't the base level cymbals, they're now 13-inch cymbals that are also 3 zones as well. Personally, my favorite upgrade is the fact that you get a hi-hat on a stand, which is also 13 inches across, and the stand comes in the box with the drum set. You don't have to buy it separately. And the final upgrade is the kick drum. It's a multi-layered design, so as you play harder, it actually feels different because of all the different layers of materials on the inside. The kick drum is also 2.5 inches larger. However, I do need to mention that you have to be very careful if you use double kick drum pedals, because unless you align them just right at the center, it will sound like your left kick drum beater is a lot quieter than the right one. So just be careful in how you attach the kick drum pedal to your kick drum pad. For me, I think that's a decent set of upgrades. Plus, it used to be $1,600, they've lowered it down to $1,500. Now let's move ahead to the next drum set, the Yamaha DTX6K3-X. And this is coming in at $1,900. So as you probably already noticed, this drum set is pretty much identical to the previous one. The only upgrade is to the tom pads. They finally have gotten rid of the rubber tom pads and have replaced it with identically sized TCS tom pads. So the previous drum set is better as far as pure value goes, but a lot of people would probably prefer the premium tom pads, even if they have to spend the extra like $400 to get it. If you want a premium drum set that takes up as little space as possible, this is your go-to drum set. But that's the thing. For people that want a compact drum set, this is great. But if you want a drum set with like a 10 or a 12-inch snare, if you want tom pads that aren't 7 inches across, that is the major weakness of this drum set. If you like larger electronic drum sets like me, you'll still want to bump up to the next drum set on the list, the Yamaha DTX8K Mesh, coming in at $2,800. So I was really surprised when this drum set came out, because this is Yamaha's first mesh drum set they've ever made. And it is much better than the previous one just because of the size difference in my opinion. So what are your main upgrades? The first is that the ride cymbal is now 2 inches larger. The snare drum is now 4 inches larger, and the toms are all 3 inches larger. It's also really cool that you can choose if you want the natural finish or if you want to have all black shells. So basically, buy this drum set if you want a larger kit that has mesh heads. That is the main attraction of going with this versus the previous one that cost about $900 less. If you want a compact drum set, don't even look at these because it has the same module and the only change for the cymbals is the ride cymbal. But if you do need something a little bit larger, this drum set is worth buying. I should probably also mention that when you see these drum sets on most music stores, they'll have these little MBF and MRW tags. That's just about the color of the shells, and it doesn't really talk about the drums themselves. Now let's move ahead to the next drum set. We have the Yamaha DTX8K TCS, coming in at $3,300. It's identical to the previous one, just with a different drum pad material, which also makes it heavier because mesh is basically weightless. This is using their TCS silicone-based pads that feel great to play on. They are on par with mesh in my opinion, just with a different feel. I also think they're a little bit quieter than mesh. I haven't recorded it, but it just seems like they're a little bit quieter. It's a personal preference which you prefer, TCS or mesh. What I would recommend is just finding your nearest big music store and go play a mesh drum set and then jump on a Yamaha drum set and see which one that you prefer. The only other major change to the set is the snare drum. It's capable of positional sensing, so you'll get tonal changes depending on where you play on the drum head. If you prefer this version, by all means go buy it, but for me, I would buy the mesh because it's a better value for your money. Now let's move ahead to the next drum set. We have the Yamaha DTX10K Mesh, coming in at $4,620. Okay, so that's a pretty big price jump. What exactly do you get with this drum set that the other one doesn't have? They do kind of look similar. The first major one that you'll notice right away is that the kick drum is now 12 inches across, and it's a mesh head material. The floor tom has been upgraded to a 12-inch pad instead of a 10-inch pad. And then finally, the module has been upgraded. The DTX Pro X may look very similar to the DTX Pro, but it is different in several key ways. The first is that it has all these extra direct outs on the back of the module, plus a dedicated MIDI in port. There's about 21 extra sounds and an extra 30 kits on the inside, which isn't much, but it's worth mentioning. Both modules have a lot of the same editing options, but because of the extra buttons and the layout of everything, it's a lot easier to get stuff done on the Pro X versus the DTX Pro. And the final upgrade is kind of invisible. While it's using basically the same sound set as the lower end module, these sounds are more detailed and they have more sound layers between them. I personally didn't see any problems on the DTX Pro module when I played it. I thought it sounded fine, but apparently this new one is just a little bit higher end in that regard. So I definitely like the look of this drum set, the large ride cymbal, the premium components, the nice upgraded drum module. I think this is a solid drum set. Now let's move ahead to the next drum set, the Yamaha DTX10K TCS, coming in at $5,169. Essentially, now you're getting the TCS pads instead of the mesh pads. Same sizes, you get the same cymbals, the same drum module, same everything. You get the nice upgraded drum rack. You're just getting a different playing head material on these drums versus the mesh. As far as pure value for the money, I wouldn't really buy the TCS version, but if you're a die-hard Yamaha fan that does love this drum head material, then they offer this as an option for you. So as a quick side note, I'm really happy to see that Yamaha released a bunch of these drum sets recently. And that's because they completely got rid of the DTX 900 series, the 700 series, the DTX 502 series, and the DTX 400 series. They basically started fresh in 2018 and have been slowly rebuilding since then. In fact, most of the drum sets on this list were supposed to come out in 2020. And I feel like the wait was worth it because these are pretty nice. And that's the video. Hope you guys enjoy, have an awesome day, and I'll see you all in a few.